Jason was born to an entrepreneuring family and raised in Ephraim, Utah. If you don't know where that is, come talk to me afterwards. He received an associate's degree from Snow College and a bachelor's degree in Parks and Rec Administration. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't say Parks and Rec. It might conjure up TV shows. Parks and Recreation Administration from Utah State University. Upon graduating, he decided he was not compatible with administration or working for someone else. Sounds like there's a story there. So he went to work for the family business and had entrepreneuring pursuits on the side. As a self-taught graphic designer, publisher, and photographer, he authored 5 books and designed dozens of travel maps for the Western United States. His writing and photography have been published in several magazines. He's the developer of several rock climbing destinations. And Jason is a craftsman who has built spec homes and developed real estate. He built and later remodeled his own home and built nearly every piece of furniture in it from repurposed materials. He owned and operated a small retail outdoor sports store in Ephraim, and he owns and operates several e-commerce websites. So if you can't tell, there's a broad variety of entrepreneurial activities here. Jason is the proud father of 4 children. He resides here in Ephraim with his wife, Kristi, who is a communications professor here at Snow College. And Jason said that his public speaking ability today should by no means reflect on Kristi. She actually runs the communication lab right here on campus. So if you didn't know about that, now you know. Whenever you have an assignment where you have to get up in front of class and do a presentation or public speaking, you can go to the communications lab, and Kristi and her team can help you improve your presentations. So, and we're glad you're here today too, Kristi. Jason is the owner of Great Basin Seed, a seed and agriculture business based here in Ephraim. So, Jason, come on up. Please welcome Jason Stevens.
Thank you, Russ. And I don't mind at all that you mentioned Parks and Rec because I totally want to be Ron Swanson. Quite possibly the coolest guy on earth. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. And everybody says that when they speak publicly, right? And very few people mean it. But I actually do, because this has given me an opportunity to consider my own narrative from the perspective of an entrepreneur and then write it down, something I've never done before. So if for no other reason, this has been a great pursuit and an endeavor for me to kind of write a portion of my own history that I've never written before. And so I appreciate that. To start, maybe just by the show of hands, I'd like to get to know my audience just a little bit. I know this is a class. How many of you are actually business majors? Raise your hand. Okay. Put your hands down. Thank you. And how many of you actually have an entrepreneurial thing in mind that you want to pursue after you leave college? Okay. Good. Well, I hope that what I have to tell you today might inspire you just a little bit. I think that the best way to introduce my company to you is by way of a short 3-minute video that kind of illustrates what we do. Now, the video speaks to the viewer through the lens of Haystack Mountain Brand, which is a brand name that Great Basin Seed owns, and we distribute to various farm dealerships across the West. And so, here you go. Oh, is it going to work, Russ? Haystack Mountain Brand is a company that specializes in supplying seed dealers with seed and inventory, and we are a custom seed cleaning operation. We're family owned and operated. I own the company with my 2 partners, my younger brother and my younger sister, and we don't answer to a corporation. We don't answer to a board of directors or investors. It's just us. We started in 1974. it separates short seed and long seed that are the same diameter. The small broken seeds or the weed seeds get caught in those pockets, and as that cylinder rotates up, it drops them into a trough and separates them from the other seeds.
Because we're family owned and operated and we started really small, we understand the needs of a really small operation. We also understand the needs of large operations. We have customers that we have shipped 1 pound of seed to. And we have customers that we have shipped, 4 million pounds to. And everything in between.
This is an optical sorter. We can take a picture of a seed sample and we can tell the machine to isolate and eject based on color, shape, and size.
If you own a farm store or an agricultural-based business, give us a call.
Okay, so that's a nutshell version of what we do, kind of a day in the life of Great Basin Seed. But there's obviously a lot more to the story, and I want to fill in some of the gaps for you. So in a nutshell, I sell seed for a living, okay? The rest of the picture is a little more complex than that because I don't just sell seed. I also grow and produce seed. I clean and condition seed. I package and market seed and prepare it for sale in the open market, usually through dealerships. And so what does that look like to the layperson? We have two primary industries that we serve. One is the agriculture industry, and the other is reclamation. And I'd like to take just a few minutes and tell you about each one of those. The agriculture industry is exactly as you might think. It caters to farmers and ranchers who grow hay or some kind of crop that they feed to some kind of animal. And seed for this industry might include small grains like oats, barley, wheat, or alfalfa and pasture grasses. And these guys are my end users, and we love them. If you haven't had beef this week, you need to repent and go somewhere and get yourself some beef. Okay? A large portion of the seed that we sell in the agricultural market is sold through dealerships, as I mentioned, and those include farm stores like IFA. Does everybody know what IFA is? You probably bought things there before. Cal Ranch, small farm and ranch stores all across the West buy their seed from us. One of the most gratifying parts of my job is consulting with the farmers and ranchers of America. And I get to work one-on-one with them all the time, usually on site, which gives me the opportunity to travel the country. I have traveled hundreds of thousands of miles, literally, of dirt roads in my career to visit with farmers and ranchers and listen to their stories of scratching a living from the ground. And it's very inspiring to me. And I have a great deal of respect for them. The reclamation side of our business caters to mostly land management agencies like the Bureau of Land Management, or in this picture, the United States Forest Service. And, excuse me, well, just a second here, I'm going to change my glasses. And we also serve the oil, gas, and mining industries. And so anytime there's a disturbance of any kind, we're there to provide seed that they used to reclaim and restore the vegetation on those sites. So what we like to do is take an area that looks like this and make it look like this again. And those are two real-life images. Those are before and after images of 6 Mile Canyon, just a few miles south of here, where we applied seed mixes to that particular burn. And so this might beg the question, well, how do we obtain this seed? And the answer also reveals another very enjoyable part of my job. For a lot of the year, that is my office, and that is how I get around. And I scour the West, searching for native stands of plants that have produced seeds that are viable for collection, and we usually do that by hand, the old-fashioned way with a garbage can and a tennis racket, or stripping the seeds by hand. And in that picture right there alone, there are 12 species that we collect every year from the Mexican border to Canada, and from the Rockies to the Sierra Nevadas. And so I travel a lot, and I see roads that most people don't see. In some cases, we're able to utilize special collection machinery to perform our harvest, and in this particular picture, we're collecting needle and thread grass near Cheyenne, Wyoming. Once the seed is collected, we bring it back to our Ephraim facility, where it's cleaned and processed. And that process involves incremental size and shape separation and can require anywhere from 3 to 15 steps. When the seed is cleaned and ready for use, it usually is combined with other species in a mix of grasses, forbs, and shrubs, and flowers. In uneven terrain, the application is sometimes done with a hydroseeder, and in extreme terrain, we get to play with helicopters. And in this picture, we're using that helicopter to spread that seed in that broadcaster on the mountain behind the helicopter. And so that's my company in a nutshell. That's what we do. But I'm not here to just give you a simple summary of my company. If I were a young college student like you, I would be interested in a "this is what my company does" lecture. But I would be far more interested in how did you get there? That would really be meaningful to me. And so I'd like to go back to the beginning and tell you how that story played out for me. And maybe it will embolden one of you with that entrepreneurial idea to give it a solid go. And maybe it will reassure you that an average guy can actually do really cool things. And so here it is, from my earliest memories. My grandfather was a sheep herder who brokered wool. As a young boy, I worked for him tamping wool into burlap sacks. And we loaded those sacks into semi-trailers and train cars bound for the wool mills. That's back when the railroad still came through Sanpete County, before the floods of '83. Grandpa was a stern man, and he had little tolerance for tomfoolery. He demanded hard work, but he rewarded us with honest pay. My father was an entrepreneur in his youth as well, and as a young man, he vaccinated turkeys and raised his own sheep, among other things. He incorporated in 1974, and over 40 years, he tried countless business ventures. I can't even count them all, to tell you the truth. He owned a sporting goods store, and he sold motorcycles and snowmobiles, and he's pictured here with his 3 brothers. He sold and erected steel buildings, and for a time he had his own building fabrication shop. He was a professional painter, and for a time was contracted by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to paint chapels and temples. He sold and installed manufactured homes. In the 1990s, the coming millennium introduced fears that the internal clocks of computer systems would fail when they rolled to the year 2000. And I don't know how many of you know that. We called it Y2K. And it was a big deal. It was a worldwide disruption. So people were anxious to be self-sufficient and build stores of emergency supplies. And in response to that, we built a cannery. And we canned millions of cans of long-term food storage. But the business that formed the backbone of all of his endeavors was the seed company. That's him in the picture there with the huge Coke bottle glasses. We tease him about that. And to his right is actually Professor Alan Stevens, who teaches here on campus as well. The native seeds were needed to support land managers who were addressing the negative effects of urban expansion, wildfires, and general wildland degradation. Dad contracted with laborers who collected seasonally, and then he cleaned and conditioned the seed and sold it to land managers in mixes. He expanded into agriculture, and his vision and decades of hard work created the foundation of the business that I own today. My own story as an entrepreneur started also when I was young, and Dad taught me, perhaps as early as 7 or 8 years old, that if we grew a garden, we could place the spoils on a table in the front yard, and people would stop to buy them. And it worked. For a few summers, we sold corn and we kept our earnings, you guessed it, in a mason jar. When we were old enough to stay up later than sundown, Dad encouraged us to sell night crawlers. For several nights a week in the summer, we would scour the lawns and flower beds for worms. And I learned valuable lessons in those days about product management, inventory control, and customer relations. We learned cause and effect and consequence. Failure to collect worms resulted in shortages, which resulted in unhappy customers. Failure to proactively care for the worms resulted in skinny, peaked worms and die-off, and no one wants to fish with a skinny worm. I remember when we overwatered the worm trays and flooded them to death. I remember when we forgot to water them and they dried up in the hot sun. These were bitter realities. But Dad, who had a broader vision and the mark of a leader, would often willingly let us fail. After all, he was not there to sell worms, he was there to turn boys into men. He encouraged us to sell the worms for 50 cents a dozen. And he taught us the basic principles of market conditions. He cited the value of our time and reminded us that even though the worms literally sprang up out of the ground, they were not free. He itemized the peat moss to house the worms and the cornmeal to feed them. The cups and the lids weren't free. Batteries and bulbs for flashlights were expensive. This was in the days before LED bulbs and headlamps. And so you'd have to catch a worm with one hand and hold a flashlight in the other. It was cold and often miserable, but it was profitable. And he decided that 50 cents was a fair price. I argued that we should charge less than the guy down the street, and perhaps we could attract some of their customers. He argued that no one wants to count change, and 2 quarters are easy to spend. He taught me one of the most important lessons I've ever learned. If you treat people right, and you give them a superior product, you'll build customer and brand loyalty. Cheaper is never better. And it wasn't long before we were charging 75 cents, and then $1, and there was no end to the customers. In my teenage years, I worked as a laborer on his construction crew. I learned more skills than I can count. All of them have blessed my life with profit and, most importantly, independence. I learned carpentry and construction. I learned metal fabrication and welding. I learned electricity and wiring. I learned to drive heavy machinery and move earth. I could drive a forklift at 12, a dump truck at 14, and erect a steel building with a crane at 16. At 15, I was encouraged to get a job working for someone else. And so I worked through high school at a local grocery store. Nothing builds more character than unloading the frozen food truck at 3 a.m. every Tuesday and Thursday and working holidays. So if you want a dose of reality, get a job. My senior year of high school, my brother and I bought a vending machine business, again with Dad's help. And we relearned all of the good and bad lessons that we learned selling night crawlers. But now we were fully in charge and responsible. We balanced checkbooks, we managed inventory and spoilage, and we made runs to Salt Lake City for product. There were vehicles and insurance and utility payments, and the machines had to be serviced and maintained. The hostess man and a dozen other vendors had to be paid every time they dropped product in the warehouse. And then I attended Snow College. I met my sweetheart, and I started a life as a young man learning the pros and cons of independence. I am by nature a pragmatic and a realistic man, And I've never believed that there are any young men who are Eagle Scouts, only that there are mothers who are Eagle Scouts. The successes of my youth were not wholly my own, and they still are not to this day. They're co-opted with people who had an active interest in my success. And a job was more than just a job. It was a framework for a lifestyle with the promise of increase. And I learned at an early age that freedom and choice are inseparable from responsibility. Proactivity is the engine that drives success. Luck favors the prepared. And most people miss golden opportunities because opportunity comes dressed in coveralls and looks like work. In the world I grew up in, you showed up and answered to your commitment. It didn't matter if you liked it, or if it was fulfilling, or if you were reaching for your stars. People counted on you, and you were responsible to them. The best jobs in life are started in your head, but finished with your hands. And if you don't have the skills, then you damn well better learn them. The buck stops with you, no exceptions. That was the world that I knew. And so as a young man at Utah State University, I had my first real opportunity to independently apply the lessons of my youth. I found employment at a sod farm and then moved to a manufactured home company. They hired me to button together the two halves of modular homes, finish the drywall, paint and install cable TV and power lines. They trusted me with a vehicle and tools, and they let me work my own hours. And so I worked in the late hours of the night after class by floodlight, and then reported to class at 7:30 the next morning. During those years, my love of rock climbing and mountaineering became an obsession, and I began to develop climbing routes. I traveled the West in search of new areas. And in the 1990s, a subgenre of rock climbing called sport climbing was in full swing. Utah was an epicenter, and one epicenter is literally 15 miles from here on the west side of the valley. And by 1994, my associates and I had developed enough routes that I began to write a guidebook. In 1995, I published that book the old-fashioned way with hand-drawn maps and a typewriter manuscript. I funded the project by selling advertising spots, and I used the proceeds to buy groceries, pay rent, and buy a computer to write the second edition. A third and fourth edition followed, as did 2 editions of an ice climbing guide. And so it came to be that my experience in construction in my youth, and the proceeds from the guidebook and the jobs that my wife had, got us through college. There were semesters where we hardly saw each other. Through our unified hard work and a commitment to remain as debt-free as possible, we graduated in 1997, having borrowed $6,000. Now, folks, I'm of average intelligence. I really am. And I don't believe that I'm any more capable than anybody else in this room. So don't tell me it's impossible to graduate without mountains of student debt. You can do it. At graduation, I was offered a job at the family business, which was booming in the wake of Y2K, and our cannery was generating a lot of business. And so I was hired to man the advertising and marketing department and to write a mail order catalog. 6 months later, we were discussing if it would be a good idea to try and sell food on a thing called the World Wide Web. And in 1997, that was a new thing. In a 4-year span, we went from labeling cans by hand with small stickers to a full automated production line. During this time, I taught myself FileMaker DML database language, and I wrote a database to manage and print product information and USDA nutrition facts on the labels. And we still use that database today. In 1999, my wife and I bought an empty lot here in Ephraim. We built a 1,200 square foot home, and it was the second most terrifying financial decision I've ever made. To maximize our dollars, we dug a hole, we poured a basement, and we didn't finish it. We only finished the part that we needed. And after hours, I worked from our bedroom, trying to do freelance graphic design work and desktop publishing. my work caught the eye of another entrepreneur, and we entered into a joint venture publishing travel maps for the Western United States. That gave me money to build a 4-car garage. And I built a wood shop in part of it, and I made furniture from repurposed materials. It was a hobby, but lucrative when I wanted it to be. I was offered $5,000 for my dining room table. When the clock turned 12 a.m. on the first day of the year 2000, nothing happened. There was not a glitch in a computer system anywhere in the world, and the perceived need for food storage vanished overnight. And on January 2nd, the phone stopped ringing. I moved from the food storage division of the company to work in the seed division under my father. Perhaps we could apply some of the same improvements there that we applied in the prepper market. In 2004, I approached Dad with a proposal. Loan me $5,000 and I will build a website and sell seed on the internet. When it becomes profitable, I'll pay you back. Now, Dad had spent the first half of his career doing business in a ledger, and the second half of his career on an adding machine. You might not even know what those are. That was a precursor to a calculator. And this was a form of technological sorcery that he could not abide, and he declined. And so I went to the bank and I borrowed $5,000, and I built a website. In 2007, my desktop publishing grew to include photography and small bits of editorial work, and for a time, I shot semi-professionally in outdoor adventure sports. My images and writings were published in several magazines, and I was contracted by distributors and manufacturers to provide action photos of their equipment. 2011 to 15 were my refiner's fire, and I learned difficult but important lessons about entrepreneurship, my capabilities, and the limits of my own self, and about making hard choices. For years, I had aspirations to design soft goods, and I have conceptual drawings from clear back in high school in journals. In 2011, I found someone who could assist me with prototyping, and I designed an ATV bag. I went through a crash course in overseas manufacturing, international trade, and ocean freight. After 2 years of prototyping, the first cargo container showed up, followed shortly thereafter by a second. At the same time, I restored an old house on Main Street and turned it into a retail outdoor sporting goods store. Partway through construction, I was asked to serve in a demanding ecclesiastical role. And a year later, the store was open and profitable, but I was pushed to my limits. I was still working a regular job at the seed store and running a website, and I was working 100 hours a week at 4 different jobs, answering overseas phone calls in the middle of the night. And it wasn't long before I started to hate all of it. Those were tough years. And then 2 things happened simultaneously that broke the camel's back. First, a rapidly growing side-by-side market rendered my ATV bags obsolete before they even landed in the port of Los Angeles. And second, I was asked to fill an even more demanding ecclesiastical role. And after sleepless nights, counsel with understanding business partners, and the support of my wife, I made 2 difficult decisions. I liquidated the assets of the retail store and sold the real estate, and I boxed the ATV bags and abandoned the project. I had bitten off way more than I could chew, and the only remedy was to spit it out. In 2015, my siblings and I purchased the seed company from Dad. We improved on the great foundation he built by using new marketing ideas and introducing new product lines. And there he is on the phone, ever the entrepreneur. We strengthened our distribution and our partnerships and our business-to-business relationships. We hired new salespeople who have increased our geographic reach, and we invested in new manufacturing infrastructure. In 2019, we made the single most stressful financial decision of my life and built a state-of-the-art, multi-million-dollar seed cleaning facility right here in Ephraim. We overbuilt it. but the business has steadily grown to the point that it runs today at near capacity. And we've added on every year since 2019. It has been gratifying to turn this into this. Every skill I gained from my earliest years, the manual labor, the carpentry, heavy machine operation, metalwork, desktop publishing, graphic design, photography, databases, website building, product design, soft good manufacturing, and overseas trade have all shaped me for the present. Every step forward or backward from that first ear of corn has led me here. And I can't isolate any one point in my life and say, that was a waste of time and money, or that was the time that made all the difference. Because every experience I've had has been a part of the whole. It may surprise you to know that my college degree has absolutely nothing to do with my occupation. I have no formal business training. I never took a single business class ever in my life. And I earned a bachelor's degree in Parks and Recreation Administration with idyllic notions of being a park ranger in some far-off place or working for a land management agency. Along the way, I realized that the dream was at odds with my true self and the free market ethic that forms my core beliefs. You see, bureaucratic jobs have by their nature a progress ceiling. And you can only go so far, and then you will never be rewarded for working harder or for being more excellent. You are rewarded the same as an underachiever who shows up and does the bare minimum. And it's not just about earning more money, folks. It's about not being stifled. And so for a time, I believed that my college degree was completely worthless. But along the way, I learned what I didn't want. And that's often more valuable. It narrows your focus by eliminating the alternatives that distract you. I've been called by my loved ones a high-functioning personality. I've been told that I have unrealistic expectations. I've also been told that the people around me feel like they can't keep up. And maybe they're all true. And I don't hold any notion that I've done anything grand or praiseworthy, and I don't see myself as a standout person. I'm just really dogged. And I think, and I believe fundamentally, that life is a simple equation. You get out of this life, what you get out of this life is proportional to what you put in. And for anyone in this audience who wonders if they have what it takes to be an entrepreneur, I say you probably do. Just go full send. And rest assured that there's nothing special or extraordinary about me. I'm just living proof that an average guy can get a lot done in a day if they just try. And you can too. Thanks.